So we're on chapter 12, section 3, and we're talking about Napoleon. And we went through how Napoleon had taken over as dictator, as France, during the French Revolution, was in chaos. And as a revolutionary, he was going to be the emperor. And so here we have the revolution leading into the takeover of a dictator like Napoleon, which happens a lot in many countries. We got to where Napoleon was going to make a fatal mistake, and it really caused the downfall of Napoleon. Well, his fatal mistake was Tsar Alexander of Russia. Now, Napoleon, he made a peace with Russia, but really in this peace, he thought he had control of Russia. So the Tsar Alexander withdrew from the continental system because he had told Russia they couldn't trade with England. And Russia said, no, we are going to trade with England. And so Napoleon said, how dare they trade with England? I told them they couldn't do that. So in retaliation, Napoleon personally led over 600,000 troops into Russia. He intended to conquer the Tsar and conquer Russia right away. You see, Napoleon had all these other countries suppressed and had control of them, and he needed to get control of England. So he wanted to focus everything on England. But when the Tsar was actually going to trade and have alliance with England, Napoleon knew he needed to quench this right away. But this proved to be a big, huge mistake. Russia's worst winter happened. That was the mistake. In the midst of winter, 1812, Napoleon took few provisions. He intended to live off the land with his soldiers, but that was pretty impossible in the freezing cold. The march to Russia took much longer than expected. And the Russian army kept retreating back, and they had to go further into Russia, leading the French deep into the cold of Russia. In September, Napoleon captured Moscow. So he captures Moscow and he drove out its inhabitants. They were left thinking they're basically, going to be killed. But when the Russians just left, they set their Moscow on fire themselves. Because Napoleon was going to take over, he would have to take over charred ruins. So how horrible, but they set Moscow on fire. And so Napoleon had nowhere to stay in the midst of the freezing cold winter. And then trying to come to the Tsar and have a negotiation, the Tsar refused to have a treaty with Napoleon at all. The Russian winter was Napoleon's worst enemy. So as the French retreated and wanted to go home, as they retreated across the vast frozen plains of Russia, the temperature dropped far below zero. They were exhausted and starving, and some of the men were half frozen. In fact, they did freeze. Men dropped by the wayside in misery of freezing cold. This was Napoleon's army. In fact, it said that one witness of this said, each camp seemed next day like a battlefield. The men found dead at their side those beside whom they had gone to sleep the night before. They woke up with men frozen next to them. How awful. The fleeing army was harassed then by Russians who attacked them. And Napoleon, let's go look here. Napoleon lost 50,000 men. 50,000 men. That's a lot of men to lose, right? A lot of soldiers. 50,000. And he lost them freezing to death. The collapse of the empire then, as the other countries saw the chance to bring an end to Napoleon's empire, they thought, man, he lost 500,000 in the midst of Russia there. So the Russians decide to charge from the east. Austria and Prussia and the German states rose up in the north. And of course, the British troops marched through Spain in the south. He was hit on all directions, all directions. Here's Napoleon. He had to come back on his horse. He fly back to get back to Paris to defend himself. And look at that picture, still has his hand in there like this. Kind of crazy. The Battle of Leipzig was the Battle of Nations. This was one of the largest battles in history of that time. Napoleon left the shattered remains of his army in Russia. So he left the Russian army that were dying and freezing to death. And by sleigh and coach, he returned to Paris in 13 days. And then he had to raise a new but untrained army. So on October 1813, the combined forces of Europe defeated Napoleon's new army at the Battle of Leipzig, called the Battle of Nations. They called it the Battle of Nations because all the nations joined in against Napoleon as dictator. More troops were engaged than any other battle in history until the 20th century. Here's a picture. All the troops are coming in the Battle of Leipzig, from England to the Netherlands to Prussia and Russia and Austria. They're all coming in. Napoleon was captured and he was sent to Elba. And Elba was an island in the Italian coast, and he was exiled there. So basically 6 months later, he was forced to go there. They didn't kill him, they just forced him to Elba, which kind of may have been a mistake, but he was sentenced for life. And they thought he'd be there he could have his own little kingdom there. And then they didn't know what to do with France, so they said the Bourbon monarchy was restored. So they took Louis the 16th, who had been executed, his brother, Louis the 18th. Well, that wasn't so good. We'll see France still did not want a monarchy. But here we have Napoleon looking out from Elba. Oh dear, what's going to happen next? Let's find out. Call it the 100 Days. So on March 1st, 1815, Napoleon escaped Elba and landed on the coast of France with a tiny army of his own. Guess what happened? He's back! Napoleon's back! Well, he received a hero's welcome then. A lot of them wanted. They didn't want to have a king again, especially a Bourbon king, back to where, Louis and such. But so that a lot of people gave him a hero's welcome. And he regained a large following. And he proclaimed the French Empire again, said, now I'm coming back. I'm the emperor again. And he marched towards Paris. The French soldiers that were sent to repel him, that the king, the new Louis, decided, the new Louis the 18th sent French soldiers. Guess what the French soldiers did? They joined Napoleon instead. It's crazy. So Napoleon reached Paris and prepared to conquer the nations again. So here we have, he's back again, Napoleon here, and they called it the 100 Days. And we'll find out here why they called it the 100 Days. Well, June 18th, 1815, Napoleon met his defeat again, at the Battle of Waterloo. The combined British and Prussian armies, led by the Duke of Wellington, was a brilliant British general, and he crushed the French army. The 100 days of Napoleon's final reign were over. He reigned for 100 days, tried to go back and conquer England and conquer the world again. And again, he was exiled on a distant island of St. Helena in the South Atlantic, where he lived for his last 6 years. He developed cancer of the stomach and died. But his last words were, Tête d'armée, which meant, I'm head of the army. He still believed he was that military head of the army of the world. That's Napoleon. Napoleon is known as the Little Corporal. Why? Because he was short. He was very short. And perhaps no man has had a greater influence on modern European history as Napoleon. This nickname was as being his small structure, but also his outstanding accomplishment. How could a dictator such as him, how could this happen? How could he control so many nations? And now he became the first of several more tyrants, several more dictators that we're going to find that attempted to conquer Europe and to conquer the world. He believed he wanted to conquer the world for the revolution, that he wanted to take over the world and be the emperor, and that would be the new world order that they wanted, and he would make things right. He definitely thought he was that figure of the new world order. His abilities won him both respect and hatred. They knew he was a genius in the military. And he plus, so he still had a lot of people that did respect him on the way he did things. His genius and his charisma were overshadowed by his pride and his greed and his moral depravity. He was not a moral person. He definitely was had pride. He believed he was the head, and he definitely had greed. Duke of Wellington called him the Grand Disturber of Europe. And Alex de Tocqueville said he was as great as a man can be without virtue. So he definitely was this great figure, as a figure of Napoleon riding in, and great military leader, looked up as a military leader, but he had no virtue. He didn't have the Lord. Although, who knows? Maybe he got saved. Who knows? Before he died. Summary. The French Revolution gave the world an illustration of the consequences of humanism and the rejection of Christian values and morality. So we saw how horrible it was with the French Revolution. The people of France sought rights without responsibilities, liberties without restraints. And the result was bloodshed, anarchy, and ultimately tyranny. So the people seeking that they wanted rights, but they didn't want to be responsible. They wanted to be free, but they didn't want any restraints of their freedom. And then the bloodshed and the anarchy came because basically that they were not a nation of righteousness. Righteousness exalts a nation. Many have romanticized this over the years and said, oh yes, the socialists have come in. We want the same way. We want as the French Revolution, and thinking of it being a good thing. We know as many as were guillotined, and what was going on was a very satanic, horrible thing as humanism tried to take over the world. De Tocqueville's warning to France was, de Tocqueville was a Frenchman who visited America during the 19th century in the 1800s, and he was examining, exactly what Napoleon had done. He called Napoleon was a despot. Despotism means a tyrant. Despotism means a dictator. Despotism may govern without faith, but liberty cannot. He was saying, if you're a despot, you may govern it without faith and say, I have no faith in God. But if you really want liberty, you have to have faith in God. How is it possible that a society should escape destruction if the moral tie is not strengthened in proportion? And what can be done with a people who are their own masters if they are not submissive to the deity of God? What does that mean? He said, how can a society, how How is it possible they can escape destruction if they don't have a tie of morality? They're not righteous in God's, that they have no righteousness. And what can be done with the people who are their own masters? They decide that we are the masters, the humanism, we are it. If they're not submissive to the deity of Jesus Christ, it doesn't work. Let's just say it doesn't work. And France is an example for us and the nations of the world of how horrible this can be, as a nation saying they're without God.